What if I told you that hidden within the tangled story of humanity, there's a people whose journey seems almost impossible, a fragile thread stretched across empires, deserts, and oceans that somehow never snap? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most remarkable tales of survival and identity the world has ever known. And trust me, by the end, you might find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about culture, genetics, and what it means to belong. When you think about the Jewish people, what comes to mind? Maybe images of bearded rabbis praying at the Western Wall, or news stories out of modern Israel. But behind those snapshots lies a far older, far stranger story, one that winds through Babylonian palaces, Spanish courts, German marketplaces, and North African deserts. And in that story are three groups that stand out: the Ashkenazi, the Sephardi, and the Mizrahi Jews. But here's where it gets interesting. These aren't just labels. They're living testaments to how culture, faith, language, and even DNA have danced together over thousands of years. Before we start unpacking that dance, let's make one thing clear. This isn't just a dry academic lecture. It's a living, breathing human saga, because embedded in these stories are lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the cost of holding onto your identity when the whole world seems determined to tear it away. The Sephardic mosaic, Iberian legacy, and beyond. Let's begin with the Sephardic Jews. Their very name comes from Sepharid, an old Hebrew word that the prophets used, which centuries later became tied to Spain and Portugal. It's a poetic twist of fate. These were the Jews who flourished in medieval Spain, living under both Christian and Muslim rulers. They built thriving communities, spoke a lyrical Judeo-Spanish language called Ladino, and produced poetry, philosophy, and science that still shape us today. But that golden era turned dark quickly. By 1492, yes, the same year Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Spain's Catholic monarchs issued the Alhambra Decree, ordering all Jews to convert or leave. Portugal followed suit. Thousands were forced into Christianity. Many fled to North Africa and the Ottoman Empire, carrying their unique customs and haunting songs with them. Imagine the heartbreak. Families who had lived for centuries in bustling cities like Toledo or Lisbon suddenly reduced to strangers wandering unfamiliar streets in Fez or Istanbul. And yet here's where the story gets extraordinary. They didn't vanish. Instead, they blended old Iberian memories with new local flavors. Their Ladino songs carried echoes of Spanish ballads, but also Arabic melisma and Turkish rhythms. Real story. My encounter with Sephardic legacy a few years ago. I met an elderly man in Sarajevo. He was one of the last Ladino speakers they're a living relic of the Sephardic diaspora. Over coffee, he sang me fragments of songs his grandmother used to sing, tales of lost gardens in Andalusia. His eyes sparkled, even as his voice trembled. That moment hit me hard. It wasn't just about language or history, it was about human stubbornness to remember, to refuse erasure, and that stubbornness is something we could all learn from today. In a world that pushes us to forget where we came from, to dissolve into sameness, there's power in holding onto a song that your ancestors once wept over. Ashkenazi threads from Rhine valleys to Holocaust shadows now shift your mind's eye northward to the chilly rivers of the Holy Roman Empire. Here rose the Ashkenazi Jews, the community most people think of when they picture European Jews. Their name, it goes all the way back to Genesis Ashkenaz, a descendant of Noah. Over centuries, they crafted a rich tapestry of learning and ritual, developing Yiddish and earthy, soulful blend of Hebrew and medieval German. But this story, too, is laced with tragedy. From medieval pogroms to the Inquisition hunting hidden Jews even outside Iberia, the Ashkenazi carried a sense of precariousness. Their fortunes would rise in vibrant hubs like Prague or Berlin, only to be shattered by expulsions or massacres. And of course, in the 20th century, came the Holocaust, an industrial-scale horror that tried to snuff out a people's memory. Before World War II, Ashkenazi Jews made up about 90% of the world's Jews. By the end, millions were gone. Their vibrant shtetls turned to ashes. Yet, astonishingly, they rebuilt. Today, many Jews in Israel and the U.S. traced their heritage to these Ashkenazi survivors. Their music, their jokes, even their culinary quirks like putting brisket and gefilte fish on the same table, are small acts of cultural rebellion against oblivion. Why this matters? Identity is in DNA, and so here is a surprising fact from modern genetic studies. Ashkenazi Jews are about 60% European by DNA. Most of that European input came through the maternal line. Imagine ancient Jewish merchants settling in Germany, marrying local women who then took on the faith and culture, weaving new threads into an old tapestry. Meanwhile, their paternal line still pointed back to the Levant, to ancient Israel and Judah. It's almost poetic. The mothers brought in new blood, the fathers carried old memories. Together, they forged something entirely unique. Why does all this matter? Because it tells us something profound about survival. Not just clinging stubbornly to an old way of life, but blending, adapting, taking root in new soil without forgetting your seeds. And in a time where so many of us feel untethered, moving for work, marrying across cultures, questioning old identities, this story of the Jewish people offers a strange comfort. You can change, you can evolve, and still remain deeply, unmistakably yourself. In next part 10, we'll explore the Mizrahi Jews, the so-called purists linked to the ancient Israelites, along with more fascinating real stories and personal lessons we can all carry forward. Mizrahi Jews, the hidden thread that never left. Now, let us turn our lens to a branch of the Jewish family tree that often gets overlooked in Western conversations, the Mizrahi Jews. While the Ashkenazi wandered the forests of Eastern Europe and the Sephardi carried Iberian laments into North Africa and Turkey, the Mizrahi stayed closer to their original heartland, living in Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Syria, Egypt. For thousands of years after the Babylonian exile, Jewish communities flourished under Persian kings, Islamic caliphates, and local dynasties. They spoke Arabic or Farsi at home, prayed in Hebrew at synagogue, and sprinkled Aramaic blessings over meals. In Baghdad alone, Jews once made up nearly a third of the city. If you've ever read about the Talmud, that vast library of Jewish law and folklore, much of it was compiled in Babylon, yes, modern-day Iraq. So next time someone says Jewish culture, remember, it's not just European shtetls. It's ancient academies on the banks of the Tigris. A true story. Grandpa's Baghdad. Years ago, I spoke with a man in Tel Aviv who told me about his grandfather's life in Baghdad. He described bustling spice markets, neighbors sharing Ramadan sweets, Jewish boys learning Torah by day and Arabic poetry by night. But then came the Farhud in 1941, a violent anti-Jewish pogrom. His family barely escaped with the clothes on their backs. When they finally reached Israel, they brought with them not just trauma, but priceless pieces of their old world, recipes rich with cumin and coriander, honey Judeo-Arabic songs, and a sense of bittersweet longing. These personal anecdotes aren't just decorative. They lay lifelines to a past that modern politics and simplistic Middle East conflict narratives often obscure. Why their story is crucial. See, the Mizrahi Jews complicate the tidy idea that Jews and Arabs have always been enemies. For centuries, they were neighbors, business partners, even friends. Sometimes that coexistence was uneasy. Sometimes it was golden. Often it was both. When the State of Israel was founded in 1948, about 850,000 Jews from Arab lands faced persecution or expulsion. They fled to Israel, reshaping its young society, bringing vibrant spices, new prayer melodies, and different political tensions. Today, roughly half of Israel's Jewish population descends from these Middle Eastern communities. It is wild to think about. While the Ashkenazi heritage often dominates global Jewish identity in movies and media, in Israel itself, Mizrahi traditions, food, and music pulse just as strongly. Music, a bridge over millennia. If you ever wander through a street festival in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, You'll hear this incredible fusion, Ashkenazi klezmer clarinets twirling around Mizrahi out riffs, drums beating out rhythms that would be just as at home in Cairo or Casablanca. This musical mingling is more than entertainment. It is a living testament to how scattered pieces of an ancient people found each other again, like shattered pottery being lovingly reassembled. Genetic echoes and new science. Now let's dip back into something science-wide. Genetic studies over the past 2 decades have painted a fascinating picture. Despite centuries of dispersion and marrying locals, wherever they landed Jews from all these different regions, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, still share a strong Middle Eastern core in their DNA. It's like beneath the spices, languages, and local clothes, a genetic through line survived. Studies on Y chromosomes pass from father to son and mitochondrial DNA pass from mother to child. Both point back, over and over, to the Levant, modern Israel, Palestine, Jordan. This doesn't mean they were a pure race. That concept is outdated and dangerous. Anyway, it means identity is a mysterious blend of memory, ritual, adaptation, and yes, some lingering biological echoes. Why does this hit so deep? I think it stirs something because deep down, most of us crave to know who we are, where we come from, and what survives of us after we're scattered by life's storms. The Jewish story, tangled, tragic, but also stubbornly hopeful, is a giant mirror for our own fragmented selves. Maybe your ancestors came from 5 different continents. Maybe your family's traditions were lost to migration or forced assimilation. Seeing how these ancient customs, melodies, and family lines reconnected thousands of years later suggests that roots can run deeper than we fear. A powerful Mizrahi lesson. Carry the past forward. I once heard a rabbi from Morocco say, "You don't honor your ancestors by living in the past. You honor them by bringing their light into your present." He meant, wear the old jewelry, yes, cook the old recipes, of course, but also let those stories teach you resilience, hospitality, and courage now. Isn't that a lesson we all need? Whether your old country was Yemen or Ukraine or the American South, the point isn't to freeze your history in amber. It's to let it keep whispering wisdom into your modern chaos. Quick reflection. What's your lineage telling you? Pause for a second. If you could sit at a table with your great-great-grandparents, whether they were Mizrahi Jews in Baghdad, Irish farmers, Nigerian traders, or Chinese artisans, what do you think they'd be proud of in your life today? What dreams did they nurture? What traumas did they endure that echo in your choices? Because in the end, this isn't just a story about the Jews. It is a story about all of us trying to stitch together meaning from the scraps of who we were. Tying it all together, the impossible people. So here we are, after traveling from the olive groves of ancient Judea to the crowded alleys of Baghdad, from the candlelit Shabbat tables in Polish, villages to haunting Ladino songs echoing through Ottoman courtyards. What have we really uncovered? Maybe the biggest mystery isn't how the Jewish people survived. It is why they had to. Why history seemed to conspire to test their ignorance again and again. Mark Twain once wrote something eerie about this. Back in 1898, he puzzled over how so many mighty civilizations, Egyptians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, had risen, dominated the world, and then crumbled into dust. Meanwhile, this tiny people, constantly exiled, oppressed, and scattered, somehow refused to vanish. Twain concluded, all things are mortal but the Jew, all other forces pass, but he remains. Now, was he exaggerating for literary flair? Probably, but there is a kernel of unsettling awe in his words, a realization that survival on this scale, against these odds, is nearly supernatural. Real-life echo, a grandmother's bracelet. Let me ground this in something tender. I once met a young woman in Los Angeles who wore a delicate gold bracelet that had traveled more than she ever had. It started in Aleppo, Syria, where her great-grandmother received it on her wedding day. It went through Cairo during a frantic escape, to a dusty transit camp in Israel, to Paris when her parents tried to rebuild, finally resting on her wrist in California. I asked her if she ever thought of selling it. Gold was pricey. After all, she smiled. almost shocked by the idea. It's not just jewelry, she said. It's proof that we made it, that after everything, we're still here, still laughing, still telling the old jokes. That's not just a Jewish story, that's a human story. Most families, somewhere in their lineage, have their own version of that bracelet, some humble object or recipe or melody that carries proof of survival. So what's the lesson for us? Let's zoom out. In an age where we're constantly being told to reinvent ourselves, to move fast and break things, to stream new content every hour, there is something radically grounding about these old threads that refuse to snap. Maybe the real treasure isn't in shedding old ties so you can be endlessly flexible. Maybe it's in knowing exactly where your roots run deep so you can bend without breaking. The Jewish story, stretched across millennia, is like a spiritual blueprint for how to lose everything yet not lose yourself. How to be chased out of dozens of homelands, but carry your homeland inside you. How to suffer deep griefs yet keep setting the table. Keep lighting the candles. Keep singing. Your personal niche. What will you preserve? And that brings us to your life. Because you don't have to belong to an ancient tribe to wrestle with these same questions. In fact, in our hypermodern world, the questions are sharper than ever. What traditions are you keeping alive? What stories will your children, or simply your community, tell because you bothered to remember them? What bits of wisdom or ritual or kindness are worth protecting, even when the tide of culture wants to sweep them away? In the language of this channel, that's your personal niche. It's the unique intersection of memory, meaning, and mission that only you can embody. A final story, the Syrian shofar. Before we close, one last small story. A friend of mine visited a Jewish community center in Brooklyn that was hosting families from across the spectrum: Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, even some Ethiopian Jews. During the service, a Syrian man was invited to blow the shofar, the ancient rim's horn. The moment he sounded it, something cracked open. Tears rolled down faces young and old, from people whose ancestors never even set foot in Syria. Because that honey, Rano, wasn't tied to geography. It was tied to longing, to the hope that after every exile, every heartbreak, there's still a way home. Closing thoughts, carry it forward. So here's my simple takeaway. Whether your ancestry is Jewish, Irish, Congolese, Tamil, or something beautifully mixed, all these stories ultimately fold into the same human drama. We're all trying to keep faith with our past, to pass on some spark of it, and to build lives that our descendants will treasure rather than mourn. Because in the end, survival is never just about staying alive. It's about staying you. A gentle invitation, so tell me in the comments, what is your equivalent of that grandmother? Bracelet or that Syrian shofar? What song or recipe or old tale makes you feel like your family? Heartbeat still echoes inside you. Share it. You might be surprised by how many people from wildly different backgrounds nod along with tears in their eyes. And if this journey through thousands of years and countless kitchens, caravans, and candlelit tables moved you even a little, please subscribe. Here, we honor stories that stand outside time, because sometimes that's exactly what our restless hearts need.